Good Vach und Chodesh. You may recall a few months ago, I shared a story about the origins of the teaching of Tzemach Tzedek. Trachku thinking will be good. And I promised that the next week I would tell you more of the previous Rebbe's talk about the subject and the famous story of the Berditchever Rebbe. But it took some time for me to find the time to prepare the story. It's a really beautiful, long story, and it's worth the wait. But sorry for the delay. I was reminded about the story this week, especially because I was in Seattle this week, and I was speaking to someone who was present at a particular talk of the Rebbe that I was very interested in. In 1986, in Parshas Re'eh, I was speaking about how when you read the talks of the Likutei Sichos, read the Rebbe's talks, you shouldn't be reading an old book, but rather you should feel that the Rebbe is there and he's talking to you and telling you, go and do. That's how you should feel. So someone who was present at that talk told me that the next week after they'd heard the Rebbe say that, they went on their weekly visit as yeshiva students. They would go every Friday to visit various stores and ask people to put on tefillin. And the week after they had heard that from the Rebbe, so it was a whole different approach. They didn't feel like they're going by themselves. They felt they're going with someone, going with the Rebbe. And he described how the impact that picture had in his mind, and as a result, impact it had on everyone else that he visited. Interesting was that in this talk of the previous Rebbe, where he describes the origin of thinking will be good, he mentions that the chassid that Tzemach Tzedek told us to, whose name was Rebbe. Rebbe always, whenever he had any issue in his life, he would picture the Tzemach Tzedek, and he would picture how the Tzemach Tzedek told him these words, think and will be good. It wasn't just that he knew the words that Tzemach Tzedek said to him. The energy of his feeling good was a result of his power of imagination, how he was able to bring back that moment by the Tzemach Tzedek and to actually feel that Tzemach Tzedek is talking to him and telling him, think good and will be good. So in this talk of the previous Rebbe, in continuation of the discussion about Reb Michal and how he pictured Tzemach Tzedek, the previous Rebbe goes on to talk about the power of imagination in general, and how it's something that Hasidim always valued, the power to imagine things, power to picture things, and how even very distant memories could be brought back and give you life and change your mood and put you in a different place, as Baal Shem Tov taught, where you are where you want to be. You're there entirely. They're mentioned this thousands of times. You are where you want to be. So just by reliving an experience and thinking about it, you go somewhere. So on that subject, the previous Rebbe related a very fascinating story of the Berditchever Rebbe, of Levi Yitzchak Berditchever. It was a summer's day, and Rabbi Levi Yitzchak told a few of his students that he wanted to go on a journey with them. He called for a wagon driver, and they set out to on their journey. No one knew where they were going, including the wagon driver. And the Berditchever Rebbe himself gave instructions to the wagon driver of where they were going to go. And he finished Shacharis, he finished his morning prayers early that day, and they all traveled together. About 30 or 40 of Yorst is a distance in Russian. There was a beautiful estate that a certain Christian had purchased, and he sold part of the estate, this huge estate, a significant part of the estate, to a German man who did something that was very unusual in those days. He managed to create a mechanized mill on the estate, and many Jews were able to have parnasa, they were able to earn a livelihood by working for him on the estate. the beautiful estate. The previous Rebbe describes how there was a rivulet that was in the middle of the estate, and on one side there was a young pine plantation. On the other side, there were rich and fertile fields. And this German man hired someone to be the manager of his estate. As soon as this man arrived at the estate, things changed very badly for the Jews. This man was born in Germany, and he assimilated. He was a Jewish man, he assimilated, and he was robust and handsome and tall, and he did very well after he joined the German army. He did so well that he was chosen to be part of the Kaiser's Guard of Honor. And that was how he was in his job. But his personal life was a different story altogether. He was a drunk, and he married someone who wasn't Jewish, and they had children. And this German man had a friend who told him about this estate, and he decided. The previous Rebbe doesn't say exactly why he decided. He just said because of some bad thought, he left his family, his wife and children. He left the Kaiser and his job for the Kaiser, and he went to go live in this estate to be the manager of this other German man. And as soon as he became the manager, all of the Jews who had some kind of an arrenda was some kind of leasing agreement with the owner of the estate, they all had to cancel their agreements were canceled. It was so bad, not only the Jews abused, but no one was allowed to buy or sell any produce. No Jews were allowed to come and buy tomatoes or cucumbers or sell anything to anyone in that whole estate and this whole area. And it was really hard for the Jews. When his arrival really ended the opportunity for many people to earn a livelihood. So the Berditchever Rebbe had taken this journey for this gross and vulgar person. They were traveling for several hours, and the Berditchever Rebbe said it's time to feed the horses. So they stopped the wagon. It was by a forest, and the Berditchever Rebbe went out into the forest, and one of his students, a few of his students, went to go watch him. They heard from a distance that he was reciting Tehillim. No one disturbed him, of course, and he recited Tehillim for over 2 hours. And then, all of a sudden, suddenly he says, okay, it's time to go, and he goes back on the wagon, and they set out back on to journey. They all thought that he would want to daven mincha where they were, but instead, he says to the students that there is a little a village at the edge of the Partz's estate, and that's where we will daven mincha. So they go back on the wagon and they continue to drive, and you see from a distance a very tall house with a balustrade and a balcony and some benches there. And it's such a tall house, I could tell that this house, if you stood in the balcony, you could see from miles away. And as they're entering the village, they hear and they see dogs barking at them on all sides. And Berditchever Rebbe says that when the Jews left Egypt, it says that no dog barked at them. But when you enter back into Egypt, that is indeed appropriate for dogs to bark. In other words, now we're entering Egypt. And I think it was the previous Rebbe who remarked, I'm not sure if it was Berditchever Rebbe or the previous Rebbe, but the remark was, Egypt, even from the time that Yosef HaTzadik entered Egypt with his brothers, as we just read in the story of few weeks of Miketz and Yeshev, Egypt is a place where there are questions and there are answers and complaints, as we see the story of Yosef and his brothers. Therefore, as we're entering Egypt, it's appropriate that the dogs do bark. So the Berditchever Rebbe said they shouldn't stop at any house in this estate. He will tell them where they are to stop. And when they approached the home where he wanted to stop, the Berditchever Rebbe told the wagon driver to tell the manager of the estate that the Berditchever Rebbe is here, and he wants to go and he wants to daven mincha, and he wants permission to go into his home so they can go and pray mincha. You can't hear me? Nobody can hear? You could hear me. But I think it's your phone because you says you can hear. Dave, you can hear me? Okay. So the wagon driver goes out of the wagon, but before he can go even out of the wagon, someone comes out of the estate, out of the home. This tall man who looked very handsome, and he was dressed like a general. On his right thigh, he had a revolver. On his left thigh, he had a dagger, and he was very tall, in a leather pouch, and he was clean shaven except for a black mustache, and his face was crimson with rage. His eyes were bleary-eyed from drinking, and he comes out and he starts to scream. And when the wagon driver tried to tell him that they're there, they want to daven mincha, he didn't want to hear a word. And in his eyes, there was murder in his eyes. At that moment, the Berditchever Rebbe made a move to get up. And when he made a move to get up, all the Hasidim also started to get up. And that caused this man to go into a crazy rage. And he took out his gun and he aimed the gun at the wagon. And he tried to fire the gun at the wagon, but no bullets came out. Meanwhile, his dog jumps out. Yes, Rebbe. Raising your hand. Okay. Meanwhile, his dog jumps out. He had a black dog, and this dog was jumping at the horses. And he, the manager of the estate, he checked his gun. His gun was in perfect working order. So when he tried to fire it at the wagon, it wasn't working. So he checked the gun wasn't working. So he tried again to shoot the wagon, and again it doesn't work. Mm-hmm. And finally, he takes the gun and he aims the gun again. But because he was so flustered, why the gun wasn't working, he aimed too low and he shot his own dog, and his dog died. So when he saw that he himself had killed his favorite dog, he suddenly was totally shocked, and he just I'm not sure you're asking me about. What happened to live show? I'm not sure you're asking. Okay, so he was totally shocked, and he's walking, and he just his whole demeanor changed. And just was taken aback. One of the Berditchever Rebbe's students, one of his Hasidim, took advantage of the moment, and he walked over to the manager of the estate, and he said to him, "The Berditchever Rebbe is here, and he wants permission from you to go into your home to daven mincha." Now, the Berditchever Rebbe was known far and wide, and when he heard that the Berditchever Rebbe was there, his whole mood changed, and he allowed them to come inside. Meanwhile, his friends who were joining the merriment of whatever drinking was going on before, they were opening windows and they were screaming out, "Oh, great, a gypsy wagon is here, a gypsy wagon is here." And when they, Berditchever Rebbe entered the home and they started to prepare themselves for mincha, the wagon driver went to go feed the horses. But Berditchever Rebbe instructed him, don't take any fodder for the horses for free. Anything that is given, you should pay for. Anyway, so the manager of the estate was walking around in a daze, and his friends who were drinking with him, when they realized what had happened, how his dog was killed, they said, "Listen, these Jew boys, they're the ones who have caused this whole problem. And because they've caused this whole problem, you should do something to them. It's their fault this is happening." So the Berditchever Rebbe said that, You should punish these Jew boys for making this thing happen to you. So the guy tells his friends, he says, listen, let me tell you what really happened. He said, when I saw the face of Berditchever Rebbe, I felt like I saw the face of the Kaiser himself. He tried to describe to them the terror that ministers had when he was working as the guard of honor of the Kaiser. Started describing to them the fear that people had when they stood in front of the throne room, in front of the door of the throne room, how terrified they were. Now, his friends had never heard of such august proceedings, so his friends asked him, "Tell us more about how things were when you were working for the Kaiser." So he started to describe to them. He said to them that there are different parts of the base, the German army. There are bases that have 100 soldiers, and which are part of a larger base of 1,000 soldiers. So when the commander of a base of 100 soldiers has to speak to the commander of a base of 1,000 soldiers, he's scared stiff. When the commander of a base of 1,000 soldiers has to go to the commander of the entire place, he is even more frightened. Can you imagine the fear he has when he goes in front of the commander of an entire area of 20,000 soldiers? When he has to report the commander of 1,000 soldiers and in front of an area of 20, the commander of 20,000 soldiers, he is totally frightened. Now, the commander of the 20,000 soldiers, sometimes he has to report to the minister of war. He has to report to his general who's on top of him, who has 10 bases of 20,000 soldiers. When he has to report to him, can you imagine his fear? Now, sometimes the minister of war has to speak to the commander of a base of 20,000 soldiers, and so the fear that he has talking to the minister of war is incredible. But the minister of war, when he has to go before the Kaiser himself, when he stands in front of the throne room, he has more fear than anyone else because he's going to the Kaiser himself. Then he tells his friends, can you imagine if there is a private, a soldier, who is in a base of 100 soldiers? He has to carry a message from his leader, from his commander, to a commander of a base of 1,000 soldiers. And from there, he has to go to a commander of a base of 20,000 soldiers. And from there, he has to go to a commander of someone who has 20 bases like that. And from there, he has to go to the commander of war. And from there, he has to go to the Kaiser himself to report. Can you imagine his fear? And when he said those words, he fell into a dead faint. He fainted. And when he was revived, he told his friends that as he was describing this, he wasn't just remembering what had happened before, but he was reliving it. He had this power of imagination. He was like imagining this happening to himself, and therefore he fainted. So this guy wasn't a very nice guy. He was so mean that if one of his servants would laugh a little loud, they laughed too loudly, he would whip them. So he really loved his dog. He always said that since he got this dog, this black dog, he had more success in his life. And they all thought that he's going to be so angry, he's going to be so, who knows what he's going to do with the anger that he has for losing his dog. But he wasn't angry at all. He just said throw the dog in some pit somewhere, and then everyone was shocked. Now, meanwhile, about a half of Yorst away from this estate was a village where 3 Jewish families lived, and they'd found out that the Berditchever Rebbe was visiting. They really wanted to see the Berditchever Rebbe. So all these three families got together. They all put on their Shabbos clothing and they went out, men, women, and children, everyone carrying babies in arms, to go and to see the Berditchever Rebbe. They knew they were a little disappointed that the Berditchever Rebbe didn't come to see them, but he's not so far away. Let's go see. They were frightened to go to the estate, but they really wanted to go, and they took also some sticks and weapons with them and whips, because, as I mentioned, this black dog was a ferocious dog. They actually nicknamed this dog the Dark Evil, because this dog was different than all other dogs. When they would go to the estate, when they have to pass by or whatever, other dogs would bark at them, but no dog would jump over the fence around the estate. This dog, first of all, this dog wouldn't just bark at you. He would bark at non-Jews. When a Jew would come to the estate, he would not just bark, he would bite the Jew. Not only would he bite the Jew when a Jew would enter the estate, but even if you pass the estate, this dog, unlike all of the other dogs, jumped over the fence and would bite any Jew specifically that went near the estate. So it's understood why they nicknamed this dog the Dark Evil. Anyway, so this time it was already 6 or 7 o'clock, and they made their journey towards the Berditchever Rebbe's, to the estate where he was staying, where he was there. And of course, it made a big impression on the people in the village. Suddenly see these, everyone was standing looking at these group of 30 people walking with their Shabbos clothing, and they were all walking together, and it made quite an impression. And they told them what had happened, how the Berditchever Rebbe is there, and they were really hoping to have an audience with the Berditchever Rebbe. They wanted that they should have a little, each of them should get a blessing from him and speak to him. So they came to the estate. They didn't yet know that the dog was killed, and when they got to the gate, of course, they all clutched their weapons, hoping nothing would happen to them. Anyways, when they arrived exactly at the time the Berditchever Rebbe began daven mincha, and certainly, says the previous Rebbe, this is a story from the Tzemach Tzedek that was told to the previous Rebbe. So certainly the previous Rebbe said that when the Berditchever Rebbe was davening mincha, he was davening mincha with the similar thoughts that the Rebbe Marash had. The Rebbe Marash, in a famous story, had a specific kavana, specific thought in his prayers, that anyone around him, when he would have that specific intent in his prayers, anyone around him would suddenly remember everything that happened to them in their life. So the previous Rebbe said certainly the Berditchever Rebbe was having this intent in his prayers, causing the memory of this estate manager to be reawakened. So the owner of the manager of the estate comes out and he sees all these people there, and he sees the Jews from the nearby village, and he brings out whiskey and beer and herring and fruit. He's very happy to see them. And then became time for Ma'ariv to start. I forgot to mention, the Berditchever Rebbe was fasting that day. He fasted the whole day, and he began to daven Ma'ariv. He was the chazan for Ma'ariv. Before he began to daven, he started to sing a song. And the previous Rebbe describes at length the kind of song it was. It was a song which begins with a certain kind of bitter and deep yearning, but then it switches color, and it's a joyous song, a song which continues with deep and powerful ecstasy. So the Berditchever Rebbe sings the song, and then he begins to daven Ma'ariv. And he starts off Ma'ariv with the first half of the melody. May the merciful one have pity on us and forgive our sins and not destroy and hold back his anger. He began that part of the niggin with the feeling of great yearning and a small voice of yearning. a voice of as previous Rebbe describes it as klois hanefesh, a person like wants to leave his body, such a great yearning. And he continued and he said, Hashem should save us. May the King answer us. And the day that we call, he continued he said that those words were the end of the nigun, which expresses great joy, how God will certainly answer us the day that we call. And the previous Rebbe said that the first half of the nigun certainly was echoed the feeling of a soul when it's told that it has to leave the storage house of souls in heaven, it has to leave all the souls, its brothers in heaven, and it's told it has to come to this world. And the second half of the nigun is how God is with us wherever we are, and a person's never alone, and how God empowers us wherever we are to do what Hashem wants us to do. So that's how the song begins, and that's how the song continues. The previous Rebbe said you cannot hope to describe the impact of the nigun on the students of the tzaddik. Everyone else, besides the students of the Berditchever Rebbe, they only heard the parable, meaning the song permeated their innermost hearts and minds and lift them up to an unfamiliar world. But they were unequipped to grasp what they had heard. They were unequipped to grasp the spiritual lesson contained in the soul's descent into a body, which the tzaddik was describing with the song. But for students, every turn of the nigun, they understood and they sensed its spiritual message. During those moments, they experienced within themselves the whole saga of the descent of the soul into a body. The previous Rebbe says, for a person who understands what he hears, a nigun tells more than a story. As they listened, the students heard the nigun describing how a soul is descending from the loftiest realms of heaven, going from one world to the next until it finally enters a body. How the soul feels as soon as it hears it has to descend and leave its fellow souls and leave the Rebbe in Gan Eden, who is assigned to be the mentor of that soul. And now it has to go into a body, and how painful that is. So the previous Rebbe goes on to describe how souls don't really know what it's like to be in a physical body, and how painful it is to leave. Anyways, the Berditchever Rebbe finishes Ma'ariv, and the Berditchever told the guests that had come from the nearby village that he wouldn't be able to see them that night. The host, the estate manager, when he heard the first part of the nigun, he couldn't handle it anymore. And he just fell to the floor with a piercing shriek of anguish. And the Berditchever Rebbe realized, the students of the Berditchever Rebbe realized that the whole journey was taking place just for the sake of this person, this estate manager. They pieced together parts of the story as he talked to the employees of this person, and the Berditchever Rebbe remained there. They wanted him to eat, but it was getting late and he wasn't eating. Instead, he began preparing for Tikkun Chatzos, the special midnight prayer that the righteous tzaddikim say to when they cry and ask Hashem to end this long and bitter exile. Berditchever Rebbe was preparing to say Tikkun Chatzos, and his students wanted him to eat, but he said he wasn't going to eat, and he closeted himself in the room. Outside the room, the manager of the estate is listening, and he was just lying on the floor, crying and crying, listening to the prayers of the Berditchever Rebbe. And although he was a moment before, he was like the previous Rebbe said, like a Haman, he was visibly transformed. The Berditchever Rebbe, the estate manager eventually gets up, and his eyes are swollen from crying. And when he approaches the Hasidim, the Berditchever Rebbe, they were a little bit afraid of him because they thought something painful may still happen. And he calmed them down. He spoke to them in a bit of Yiddish and Polish, and he told them how he had become a personal guard of the Kaiser, and he had come to hate Jews. He said his greatest pleasure was hurting Jews. He says, when I saw this wagon just a few hours ago, I wanted to kill some of the Jews that were on the wagon. And now, he said, I decided to become a Jew like all other Jews. He broke down and cried, and he asked them to show them they should show him what to do. And they should speak to the tzaddik for him, so he should help him turn into a good Jew. So that moment, the tzaddik's door opened, and one of the Hasidim went over to the tzaddik, and he asked, is there a brook, is there a river somewhere that he could immerse himself? And the villagers who had decided to remain there that night, with the permission of the manager who invited them to stay that night, said that nearby in the village, there is a mikveh. And so the Berditchever Rebbe had the wagon driver harness the horses so they could drive there. The owner of the estate, the manager of the estate, wanted them to use his horses, but Berditchever Rebbe refused. And he went to the mikveh nearby, and the village was so happy. Not only was Berditchever Rebbe going to give them an audience, which he did in their city, but he was going to daven with them. And he davened, as his custom was, daven in the early morning, and then he was alone and saying more prayers, and then he studied his Torah portion, and the estate manager came to the village as well. And because of what had happened, the people were a little bit nervous that he was there. But make a long story short, when the Berditchever Rebbe finished davening and spoke to each of the villagers, he spent a long time alone with this estate manager, and no one knew what he said to him. But this manager eventually, right after this audience, he parted ways with the owner of the estate, and he moved to Berditchever, and he began a real wonderful Jewish home. And no one in the village of Berditchever knew who this man was, except for these students who had accompanied the Berditchever Rebbe. So the whole story the previous Rebbe was saying, at the end of the story, to highlight the power of imagination and how our ability to picture things really can change where we go and what we're doing. And apparently that this manager was able to save him was also his ability to his power of imagination. That's how the tzaddik was able to reach his neshama, and he was able to picture for himself when he saw the Berditchever Rebbe, and this made such an impression on him, and it reminded him. He told his friends, it was just like he saw the Kaiser, and that's what made him lose aim with his revolver. The main thing is that we shouldn't have to use our power of imagination, and we should be able to see Mashiach Tzidkenu come today. We should go right away to Yerushalayim, and automatically this 10th of Tevis this week should be transformed to a day of Simcha Yom Tov. And that's the Maisa. A good Tavach. Any questions or comments? All right, good Tavach. Good Chedesh.